Time for the Iowa Almanac right now, and time to find out what has happened on this day back in history. But Professor Stein, what do you have going on?
I'm just fascinated by the fact that the hairball crowd wanted the pork belly on a stick, that different crowds wanted different foods.
Yeah,
that is a scientific survey right there.
It surprised us. We had no idea. So we'll find out. Who knows? Maybe the Rib Shack sandwich will win, and in the long run, we don't know.
Well, what I have is Almanac on a stick today.
All right, that sounds good.
There's no fair theme whatsoever to the story, so I tried to make it work. This actually is a story that is, again, not one of the shining examples of American history, but it is something we need to know. Back before 1830, now that's before Iowa was even a territory, much less a state, the land that is now Iowa was in full possession of two Native American tribes, the Sacs and Foxes, and then they were two different tribes, but they were aligned in many ways. And so you often hear of the Sac and Fox in Iowa. Well, they actually were two, Sacs and Foxes. Now, north of that territory, in what is now Minnesota, the Sioux tribe hunted. The Sacs and Foxes were allied, but basically against the Sioux, constant warfare. And since formal boundaries were really not known to any of them, there were frequently bloody conflicts when one would cross over into what the other thought was their territory. Various efforts to secure peace were attempted by the U.S. government, including drawing real live boundaries. But again, those were lines and not followed very closely by either tribe. So on August 15th of 1830, the United States bought a strip of land 20 miles wide from the Sioux along the southern edge of their land. The government bought another 20-mile wide strip of land from the Sac and Fox along the northern edge of their land. That created a 40-mile wide buffer owned by the U.S. government, and it was called the neutral ground. Both tribes could hunt and fish in that area, provided they did not fight or interfere with each other, since the land was now under the direct control of the federal government. It was one of these ideas that some government official thought sounded really good on paper. The neutral ground stretched from Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, southwest to Fort Dodge. So if you can imagine a 40-mile wide swath stretching from that area in a diagonal fashion. We don't know if it really would have worked long term, because just 3 years later, the federal government used the neutral ground as the place where they would move members of the Winnebago tribe, who were being displaced by the U.S. government from their ancestral home in what became Wisconsin. Again, the idea of boundaries didn't exactly work, but it was an attempt to bring peace between two tribes when the United States established a neutral ground to separate the Sac and Fox from the Sioux on this date in 1830.
I'm just amazed as to how they drew the boundaries back then and how they knew where the different territories were without having the technology that we have today.
Yeah, and it was the compass. It was good map makers. But again, that is what the European Americans knew. The Native Americans knew time based upon sunrise and sunset. They knew boundaries based upon markings and areas that they had state claim to. And so it truly was the textbook definition of clash of culture.
Yeah, rivers and streams as barriers and things like that. Yeah, amazing. Yep. All right, so if people want to go back and revisit the things we talked about here today, or look back at some of the ones you've talked about previously, how can they do that?
IowaAlmanac.com, Lou. It has all the stories, and we put a picture up there, usually one that you're using as well. We've got a nice map there that shows how this was all divided. Very complicated map. IowaAlmanac.com, and of course the preview every morning on the Twitter machine at IowaAlmanac.
That works. All right, sir. Well, we will talk to you bright and early tomorrow morning at 9 bells.
I will be here. You two have respectively great days.
You as well, sir. You as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. There it is. Professor Jeff Stein from Waterloo, Iowa, with today's Iowa Almanac. All right.